What would you do if your corporate network or website came under attack? What would the impact be on your customers and your employees? I'm John Graham Cumming, Cloudflare's CTO, and I'm here to talk about ransom DDoS attacks and how to protect your business. In recent months, we've seen an alarming rise in targeted cybersecurity threats known as ransom DDoS attacks. In this video, I will explain what these attacks entail and how you can protect your business. The goal of ransom DDoS attacks is extorting large sums of money from their victims. In a typical scenario, a malicious actor sends a ransom note threatening to unleash a digital swarm of bogus traffic designed to completely take down your website and potentially your internal corporate network. They may launch an attack before contacting you as a way to demonstrate their potential to inflict harm. Should you find yourself in this situation, follow these steps. First, do not panic, as this may play into the attacker's hands. Second, contact law enforcement and provide them with a copy of the ransom letter. Third, do not pay the ransom. Even if you meet the attacker's demands, there is no guarantee that they will not attack again. Prepare before you're attacked by visiting cloudflare.com/ransom-DDoS to learn how our DDoS protection can thwart attacks against your internet properties and how Cloudflare Magic Transit extends the same world-class protection to your entire network. Thanks for listening, and do reach out to us to protect yourself and your properties against these attacks.
Hello, everyone, and thanks for joining us on today's session on DDoS attack trends and predictions for 2022. Just as a reminder, this session is being recorded and will be available to you on demand as well. Today's session will be about 45 minutes in duration, and we will take questions at the end, but feel free to type them into your Q&A panel as we go. I'm really excited about this webinar because I have two really great guests joining me here today. I have with me Doug Madory, Director of Internet Analysis at Kentik, where he works on internet infrastructure analysis. The Washington Post has dubbed him the man who can see the internet for his reputation in identifying significant developments in the global layout of the internet. Doug is regularly quoted by major news outlets about developments ranging from national blackouts to BGP hijacks to the activation of submarine cables. And also joining me today is David Belson. David Belson is the head of data insight at Cloudflare, responsible for making Cloudflare this trusted source of knowledge about internet trends and communicating what's happening on the internet to the general public. He has over 25 years of experience in the internet space, holding roles at web hosting companies, cloud providers, and content delivery networks, and has spent the last dozen years or so publishing content based on internet measurements and monitoring data. Doug and David, why don't you say a quick hello to our viewers?
Hey, guys. So I apologize for my voice. I've got a bit of a rasp. It's gotten worse over recent days, but I'll do my best on this webinar.
And we appreciate you joining us despite that, Doug, so thank you.
And thanks for the introduction to meet. I'm happy to be here and to join the webinar.
So let's go ahead and dive right in. So as many of you know, Cloudflare publishes a quarterly DDoS trends report, which many of you have read already. And one of the key reasons we're able to do this is the Cloudflare Global Network. Cloudflare was founded about almost a decade ago with one mission, and that's to help build a better internet. And by better internet, we mean one that's faster, more secure, and more reliable for everyone. And to do that, we've built a large global network that spans over 250 cities in over 100 countries, serving millions of websites and users and terabytes of traffic. And as a result, we see a lot of internet traffic. And we're able to spot trends and implement mitigations against new threats really quickly. On a typical day, Cloudflare stops over 86 billion cyber threats. And if there's a botnet or an attack vector out there, chances are very good that we've seen it. And that's what we want to share here with our audience. And in this presentation today, we'll go over some of the trends we're starting to see in 2022 and how that compares with what we saw in 2021. And our goal really is to help you assess the threat to your organization and plan your strategy accordingly. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get started. So before we jump into 2022, I want to do a quick recap of 2021 from a DDoS perspective, and what are some of the things that stood out for us. If I look back at the year, there's really sort of three themes that come to mind. First one, of course, was ransomware attacks. Ransomware was a big problem. It got a lot of airtime, got a lot of visibility, and also there were a lot of real attacks on critical infrastructure, and it dominated the first half of the year and continued throughout the rest of 2021. But one thing that didn't get a lot of attention and airtime is ransom DDoS attacks. These were carried out either by themselves by organized gangs with fancy names like Fancy Bear and Fancy Lazarus, or it was done in conjunction with ransomware attacks by gangs such as Revel, which many of us have heard of in the press. So that was a big theme for me. Or also new botnets. So we saw the Maris botnet pop up, and it was responsible for some of the largest DDoS attacks ever seen. And on an average, we saw Maris botnet-based attacks of 104 DDoS attacks in a typical day using this botnet. So we'll continue to monitor the botnet situation and report on anything new that we find. And then the other thing that stood out for me was the second half of the year, around the October-November timeframe, there was a slew of attacks on voice-over IP services. It seems like attackers discovered that, hey, we have these things called SIP ports that are open on the internet, and they just started hammering them. And this caused significant service outages on major voice-over IP providers, and that caused some damage. But I'm going to turn it over to David and just ask you, what do you take away from this, and what stood out for you in 2021?
So I think looking back over the last year, I think there were probably three key takeaways for me. The first was the telecommunications industry that was a big target of attacks in Q1. It makes sense because it's critical infrastructure, but I think it would really have the potential to be self-defeating if those attacks were successful, that the attackers could potentially lose their access to the internet. And I think that, I would expect them to go targeting gaming and companies and financial services companies, which they did later in the year. Another big takeaway for me was seeing that the DDoS attacks were overwhelmingly lower volume and shorter in duration. I was kind of surprised by that. It leads me to wonder whether it's a function of these shorter attacks are probes, maybe in advance of a larger attack, or if the attackers are hitting those sites and then realizing, wait a minute, these targets are protected by Cloudflare, and then giving up. And then I think the third piece for me was looking at Quick and its growth as an attack vector. It's obviously a little concerning as it's a newer protocol and one that has a lot of promise. But I think sort of as expected, the attackers are saying, hey, this is a new protocol, and they're going to look for vulnerabilities, security holes, and try to figure out how to take advantage of whatever they're finding.
Those are really great insights. Doug, anything that, you've been sitting on with a bird's eye view of DDoS attacks on the internet for a very long time. And you've seen that evolve and change over the years. Anything additional you'd like to add to this?
Yeah, I don't track the DDoS attacks directly so much, but this is something that's going to be with us for a long time. I don't see any us getting out of it, and so we are reliant on technologies like Cloudflare to try to stay one step ahead of the attackers. But this is going to be with us for a while.
So that's a quick look back at 2021 and what's been happening on the scene. Looking ahead, what does 2022 bring, right? So there are some questions I'm sure that are in a lot of our minds, and we made some observations about these, but I want to talk about, we can spend a lot of time here going through the whole report, but let our viewers read it. But I want to talk about sort of four things that are top of mind for me, certainly, and I'm sure are for a lot of our viewers. The first question is, what's going on with ransomware attacks and ransom DDoS? Is it at the same level? Is it declining? Is it increasing? So we'll take a look at some data around that. The second question in mind is, what's new, right? What new attack techniques are we finding? We just recently discovered and disclosed one, and we'll talk about that. Third area is just emerging trends and threats. What's changing? And David alluded to some of this. So we'll take a little bit of a deeper look at the data around emerging threats. And then the last topic that I'm sure is on a lot of our minds is we'll talk about what's going on in a situation in Eastern Europe, what's going on with the cyber war there, right? What does the data tell us about what's been happening there? So without further ado, let's jump right in. So what's going on with ransom DDoS? So what we're looking at here is a chart of the percentage of incidents that Cloudflare detected that were ransom related. So every time we send an alert to our customers about a potential DDoS attack, we ask them, send them a brief questionnaire. One of those questions is, was there a ransom node associated with this incident? And what you're seeing here is a chart of the percentage of respondents that replied yes to that. And this gives you a rough idea about what portion of DDoS attacks out there are ransom related. And as you can see, over the course of last year, the distribution varied quite a bit. There was a big spike in the beginning of the year, slow down in the middle, and then another big increase towards the end of the year. This year has been a little bit interesting. We saw about 17% were ransom related. DDoS attacks were ransom related in the month of January. Then we saw a sharp decline. February was about 6%, March was about 3%. And 3 months is a very small period of time to call this a trend. So I wouldn't be too quick to call victory over ransom DDoS just yet, but continue to monitor this and see how this evolves over time. The one thing to realize is that ransomware continues to be a very lucrative source of revenue for cyber criminals, so they're not going to give up on this just that easily. Right? And the other thing to sort of notice here is we also had the beginning of a ground war in Eastern Europe in the late February, early March timeframe. And we don't have any data to kind of conclusively say anything, but that's one thing I wonder if that had an impact on and attention was focused elsewhere. But my key takeaway from this, and I'd love to get David's take on this as well, is good DDoS protection ensures that you're a hard target for attackers, and that way, there's an economics to cyber attacks, right? And if it's too expensive, it's too costly for them to hit you, they're going to move on to someone else. So a good DDoS protection strategy is always the best offense. David, let me turn it over to you. And what do you take away from this decline?
So I absolutely agree with you that it's a little bit early to be declaring victory. We did see a similar drop, like you mentioned, early in the year last year or mid-year last year, and then it ramped aggressively into late year. So I think we really want to see over a longer period of time whether this is a real trend or if it's just sort of a one quarter. But having said that, I think one observation I have though is that ransomware attacks I think really very frequently bring visibility and attention to the attackers, which arguably makes them more risky. They may be getting a spotlight that they really didn't intend or want. So I think we may start to see these attackers focusing more on exploiting vulnerable cryptocurrency sites or exchanges. Like they used to say, that's where the money is. In fact, we published a post yesterday talking about our mitigation of a pretty significant attack against a cryptocurrency company. So I think we're starting to see more and more of that in the news, and I suspect that may be where the attackers are shifting to.
That's an interesting point, right? So you're saying that sort of instead of just thinking of ransom as a source of revenue, potentially looking at other sources that are more digital native, like cryptocurrency, and trying to inflict damage there, right? Right. Yeah, that's an interesting trend to keep an eye on going forward. So, yeah, I think this is one area we're going to continue to monitor very, very closely, and I'm curious to see how things evolve through the rest of 2022. The other thing I want to talk about is we discovered a new exploit in the beginning of this year. And it was published through a joint industry disclosure. This is a CV link if anyone's curious and wants to get into more details. But this is something that is a zero-day vulnerability or capability, if you will, on Mitel voice over IP systems. There's a service on these systems called the TP240 driver, and it has a debugging command called start blast, which can be used to launch a blast of calls for testing purposes. And what better lovely tool for DDoS attackers to find than something that can amplify traffic on the internet? And using this, potentially a malicious actor can use a spoof source IP and get start blast to respond with a blast of calls targeted at a DDoS target. And when we initially discovered this, we thought this could have a potentially unlimited amplification factor. Since then, we found some upper bounds on how much this can be used. I think one system can only be engaged at one time. Until the calls are completed, it's not available for any more attacks. So there is an upper bound on how big of an attack this can launch. But this was very concerning. Our Cloudflare engineers were involved in investigating this, as well as Doug, I believe you were involved as well in the investigation. So this is one that we were able to thankfully disclose on time. The vendor had a patch out in time. We haven't seen any major exploits of this attack so far. But this falls into a category of attacks we call amplification or reflection attacks. And David, I'd love for you to chime in on these types of attacks, because I know we've got some more insights into this coming up.
Yeah, I think what we're starting to see, or continuing to see, really is that attackers are targeting UDP-based protocols, especially with the spoofed IP, the spoofed source IPs. So I think there's probably a couple of things that I would recommend there. One is hopefully as an enterprise, you're doing regular attack surface reviews, looking for vulnerabilities and sort of holes in your organization's defenses. So, as you're doing those reviews, look for UDP-based protocols as part of the applications, as part of the tools that you use, and make sure that you're locking stuff down. The other is, taking steps to prevent spoofing of your IP space. This is something I haven't admittedly looked at in a while, but I know that there are steps that IP owners of IP address space can take to prevent others from accepting spoofed IPs.
And that's really good advice. Some of the things we did at Cloudflare, so of course, when we first detected this, we deployed mitigation measures in place throughout the network. So our customers were protected. And then when we disclose it publicly, of course, send an advisory with some recommendations on steps to follow. One of the things you could do if you happen to have one of these systems is, follow Mitel's guidance and patch your devices on time. Make sure that you don't have the zero-day vulnerability anymore in your system, as that's one of the responsible things to do. But also, if you do have the system, another thing you could do is make sure you block public access to UDP, like David was mentioning, right? So as part of your attack surface review, see what open ports you have out there. This is something that could be used as part of this exploit, and it's vulnerability still out there. And then Cloudflare customers can use Magic Firewall, which is built into Magic Transit, to easily add this rule. So the Mitel exploit, had the potential to wreak a lot of damage. We still don't think we've seen the last of it. But looking at trends and looking at sort of the different attack vectors, we're starting to see a major increase in reflection amplification attacks using these types of discovery protocols like Lantronics or SSDP. We saw almost a 10x increase in attacks using the Lantronics discovery protocol, also UDP-based. That are typically left open on networks open to the internet inadvertently, and also the SSDP, which is a very similar protocol, about a 7x increase. And David, would love for you to just reiterate the advice you just gave on protecting against these types of attacks.
Yeah, I know. I mean, I think in addition to trying to take steps to mitigate them, I think. Another suggestion I would make here would be, to identify, one is identify, any sort of shadow IT assets, so that, make sure those get included in your attack surface reviews, to make sure that you're not running one of these vulnerable types of applications, you're not exposing one of these vulnerable protocols. But another is, as these sorts of vulnerabilities are identified in specific applications, look at your infrastructure and look at your tool sets and see, are you, if you're not using Lantronics, are you using something similar or from a competing vendor? Because if there's a hole in one area, there is a potentially good chance that, a vendor that's offering similar services using similar underlying tools or protocols, could be vulnerable as well, and just nobody's poked that bear yet.
Yeah, shadow IT is a real sort of growing problem in many organizations, and you might have these things lurking out there that you're not aware of. So also another effective strategy is to make sure you're blocking incoming UDP traffic, right? Unless you sort of take the approach of you block what you don't need unless somebody asks for it, and then you open it up, right? So we talked a little bit about a couple of these new attack vectors. We talked about amplification attacks, which are kind of more on the volumetric end of the spectrum, right? When we think of DDoS, we always think of volumetric attacks and massive floods of traffic. But what are we actually seeing at the network layer across the entire data set? That's a little bit different. So David, you referenced this in the beginning of the session, but here's some data, right, that we've collected from Cloudflare that's showing that a vast majority of attacks are actually low intensity and low PPS, and they're very short-lived. I would love your take on this.
Yeah, I think there's a couple of things to say here. One is, the attackers may be trying to kind of fly under the radar here, that they're executing these attacks, trying to inflict some damage, but making them sort of low volume and short enough that they potentially escape a recognition, or they realize, or they figure, by the time that you sort of realize what's going on and start to ramp up your defenses, the attack is over and they've moved on. Another thought, as I mentioned earlier, is that these could be simply probes. So let's try to knock on the door a little bit, see what kind of give it has, and for those ones that are found to be more vulnerable, they come back later with a bigger, heavier attack. Obviously those big, heavy attacks are the ones that get the press and get the industry recognition. And the third, I think, potential interpretation of this is that the attackers are, trying to ramp up an attack. They're realizing that customers are protected by Cloudflare, and they basically say, this is just not worth our time, not worth our energy, and they move on to try to find a less well-protected target.
David, I have a question for you. Does this include attacks that were mitigated through the on-demand DDoS mitigation from Cloudflare? Because the reason why I ask is we can see a lot of. I'm guessing that some are, because when I look at our aggregate net flow and look at attacks that get mitigated by on demand, whether that's Cloudflare, Prolexic, or things like that, I do see the attack dry up pretty quick once the DDoS mitigation is in place. So that might lead to a short-lived attack, just a little bit of spillover as they are tearing it down. Maybe it speaks to the efficacy of these mitigation techniques.
Right. So I don't have specific insight into that right now, but I think that certainly could be a function of what we're seeing. It could be driving what we're seeing here. In fact, I was talking to a customer yesterday that's presenting with us at the upcoming Cloudflare Connect sessions, and he showed a graph that was almost exactly that. You could see the DDoS attack ramp up, and then as soon as they turned it on, you saw traffic drop, and then you saw it basically just as it as the implementation sort of got really underway, it effectively went away.
Yeah, that's a really interesting observation, right? This data set is from the point we start seeing the traffic, right? So there might have been a sort of a higher spike before that precedes this, but certainly I think when they do encounter effective mitigation, then the attacks tend to taper off, right, and move on to other easier targets, because there's an underlying economics to cyber attacks, right, that they have to be cognizant of. Yeah, and when I see data like this, one of the takeaways I think of is, this is short-lived attacks. It's going to be hard to combat them manually, right? If you're waiting for alarms and incident triage and response, so it's going to take a while, and the attack has gone away by then, and that's really important to have automation in place, right? So automated workflows, automated triggers, and we'll talk a little bit about some of the joint work we're doing with Kentik on this. The other topic we want to jump into, I'm sure a lot of folks are curious about, is the situation in Eastern Europe. As most of you know, there is a ground war going on in Eastern Europe, and one thing we've learned is cyber war is part of that. So while we've all seen kind of images of the ground war on press and TV, I'm sure many are curious about the cyber war, what's going on there, and what can we tell from the DDoS trends data. So we've got some data from the Cloudflare side. Doug's going to share some data from Kentik as well. If you look at the breakdown by industries, we see something interesting, right? So the chart on the left is application layer DDoS attacks within Russia, and the chart on the right is application layer DDoS attacks within Ukraine, split out by source country. And what we see is, by leaps and bounds, online media is significantly large target in both these countries. So this is presumably an attempt to control access to free and clear information. So heavy targets on both sides. But one of the questions people think of is like, well, are they all coming from the opposing country? So the data says that actually the source countries are very dispersed, very globally dispersed. So that indicates to us that they're using botnets of some kind, right? So blocking traffic from specific country or specific geo may not be the most effective strategy of dealing with them because you're dealing with global botnets. And one of the things we've talked about and we've blogged about this from a Cloudflare perspective is, how do we make sure that we have Russians and Ukrainians, everyone has access to the open internet, and we keep information flowing, correct, accurate information flowing freely into Russia. And if there are attacks, and how do we keep them from getting out? And when we say attacks, not just the sources of the IP flows, but also command and control servers, right? How do we keep those attacks from getting out? That's been our focus at Cloudflare. The other thing I want to point out is also BGP and some inherent vulnerabilities in BGP on the internet. So when BGP was first built, security was not the primary consideration, resiliency was. So we see a very sort of open, trusting protocol that quickly exchanges information all around the world, interconnects everybody. But it's just as easy to inject bad information into BGP, either accidentally or maliciously. We've seen inadvertent hijacks in the past. There was a situation a few years ago where all traffic for Google started flowing through Russia, and then on its way to China, where it got stopped by the Great Firewall, and Americans didn't have access to Google for almost an hour, right? So we've seen incidents like that, and there's ways to control that using cryptography, using RPKI, right? So we've always been encouraging our industry partners and our ISP partners to adopt this and embrace this, and it can bring down the odds of accidental or malicious hijacks quite a bit. But I want to turn this over to Doug. And Doug, you have some interesting data here in the following slides, and just to what you saw from a Kentik perspective.
Thanks. Before I get into this about the DDoS attacks, we have to acknowledge the human tragedy. There's been thousands of people who've lost their lives, and that is the biggest issue here. But in our business, we have a lot of data on what's going on in the internet, and about a week prior to the Russian invasion into Ukraine, I started getting calls from the press and people in the industry asking what we could see, what Kentik could see with our aggregate net flow about DDoS attacks going into Ukraine. And these were a few graphs I put out via Twitter of some of the initial targets. This isn't comprehensive. These are just some highlights. But we started seeing attacks targeted against the hosting operation, hoster that hosts the Ukrainian army website, as well as a couple of the banks, the major financial institutions of Ukraine. If you go to the next slide. There we go. And then those DDoS attacks against Ukraine appeared to shift towards some of their civilian government infrastructure. On the 23rd of February, we saw simultaneous attacks against the Ukrainian parliament, the foreign ministry, and the executive cabinet. Now, I rely on a lot of the other DDoS researchers and experts in the space here to tell me how novel some of these things are. And as far as I know, none of these are so much novel. A lot of NTP, data reflection attacks. None of them are necessarily record-breaking in size, but they are enough that they could disrupt communication, especially for a lot of these sites had no DDoS mitigation strategy. Some of them now are customers of Cloudflare, but at the time they were taken offline. Go to the next. Yeah, I can do it. All right. So the invasion took place on the 24th of February, and a couple days later, the Ukraine's Minister for Digital Transformation, this guy Fedorov, who's a very vocal in defense of his country on social media, put out a call to the world asking for a volunteer IT army to attack 31 prominent Russian websites. These were government websites, military websites, as well as most of them are private companies, industry banks. He called it World Cyber War 1. A couple of these are actually behind Cloudflare, are staying up as a result of Cloudflare's work. But if we go to the next. So then soon after that, even before that, his call, we started seeing retaliatory DDoS attacks targeting prominent things in Russia. So one of the first things to be attacked was the Kremlin's website, kremlin.ru. Now, if that website goes down, the Russian government can continue to operate. The Russian military can still do its thing. This is more of a symbolic thing, attacking a brochure. A lot of these attacks were against symbolic targets. In addition, the Esper Bank and Alpha Bank were targeted in consecutive DDoS attacks. These attacks have continued, and what we saw in Russia was some of the various targets started taking different evasive actions. So one government platform, this AS-196747, had Rostelecom, the state telecom of Russia, stop announcing its routes outside of Russia so that it wouldn't be subject to these DDoS attacks. Conversely, Mil.ru, the military website of Russia, restricted its access to only IPs coming from within Russia. Everyone else got a 418 I'm a teapot error used to alert a user that they are being administratively blocked. Those are a few highlights from what we've seen in Russia and Ukraine.
Thanks, Doug, for those for those insights, and appreciate you sort of being here with us despite your vocal challenges, and appreciate sharing your insights with our viewers. And again, I want to reiterate what you said earlier: is the most important thing here is sort of the human tragedy that's happening, right? And that's the most important issue, and that's what we need to keep our eyes on. This is, again, additional data to help us understand kind of how this is playing out and what we may need to do to protect our organizations against from getting caught in the middle of this. So with that being said, I want to jump into kind of Cloudflare DDoS protection and talk about kind of what we do here and what are some of the key trends that we've seen. And let me see if I... But before I do that, I want to talk about kind of how DDoS protection has been done in the past. Now, we saw a number of generations of DDoS protection solutions. Initially, it was just a feature on the firewall, and we saw custom appliances that then we realized that DDoS is actually happening, is causing problems upstream from our networks, and we started doing sort of cloud-based protection, some hybrid approaches. And then we had the scrubbing center-based approach where we just said, okay, we can set up dedicated data centers, and their sole function is to scrub vast volumes of traffic and stop DDoS attacks, right? And this is kind of great technology based on what was available 7, 8, 10 years ago and what was state of the art then, right? The problem that the scrubbing center approach has is that it causes your traffic to go through these scrubbing centers, and maybe a few of them around the world, and it actually diverts your traffic through a suboptimal path. and that always adds on additional latency in the network, always adds on performance penalties. I've talked to a number of organizations where they just know that when the DDoS mitigation is on and they're going through a scrubbing center, their user experience will suffer, and that's just the price they've been paying for a long time. So this approach is sort of fundamentally broken. And when Cloudflare built Magic Transit DDoS mitigation, we took a fundamentally different approach. And we said that, hey, we don't want to have dedicated scrubbing centers. The entire network should be able to scrub and stop DDoS traffic. And that's how essentially Magic Transit works. So what we do is we announce customer prefixes from the Cloudflare network using our Anycast architecture. And then we ingest all the traffic that's going to the customer network all across our network. And that includes good traffic, legitimate users, as well as any malicious traffic like DDoS. And at the edge of our network, we're able to do the analysis and apply the filters and block unwanted traffic right there and there. So the attack surface essentially becomes our entire 121 terabits per second edge network, which is able to absorb the largest volumetric DDoS attacks that orders of magnitude larger than the largest attacks that we've seen. And then we deliver clean traffic over an IPsec or GRE tunnel to the customer, or we can even direct connect using Cloudflare Network Interconnect right into the customer's network. And then this is a really effective approach because your traffic always stays on the most optimal path, and it doesn't have to go through any dedicated scrubbing centers. And that's just a function of the way we've built our data centers, which run in over 250 cities around the world. And we've built every data center to run every Cloudflare service, so we don't have to do this traffic tromboning that can impose latency penalties and so on. And of course, this has been recognized by industry leaders, a number of our customers as well, and 3 big analyst firms have consistently rated Cloudflare at the top of the pack for DDoS mitigation solutions. And I want to spend a little bit of time talking about some work we've been doing jointly with Kentik. So Kentik, as many of you may know, is a partner of Cloudflare and one of the leading network observability solutions out there. And we've been working with Kentik to provide our customers a single solution for network traffic intelligence, attack detection, mitigation, and investigation. So I'll turn this over to Doug in a minute, but I just want to give you guys a nutshell of what this is and how it works. So Kentik Protect is a network observability solution, and it ingests traffic analytics data from your network, from your edge routers, wherever you need it to, and it learns about your network traffic patterns. And when it suspects that there is a DDoS attack at play or anything that triggers a DDoS alarm, it automatically make an API call into Cloudflare Magic Transit, and Magic Transit will then start announcing those prefixes for that customer, and we'll start attracting all the traffic. And then the traffic will then start going to Magic Transit, where all the unwanted DDoS traffic can get stopped, and then clean traffic is delivered to the internet. So you're getting the benefit of Cloudflare's 121 terabits per second of edge network capacity that can do the filtering and do the blocking. It's activated through an API call from Kentik. You have full control of your network at all times with real-time analytics. And the nice thing is all of this is a fully SaaS-based solution. So there's no boxes to manage, there's no appliances to deploy. And it's a clean solution, easy to onboard, quick to onboard. And Doug, I'd love to, if you have anything to add for our viewers.
Yeah, I mean, you summarized it well. So Kentik, for many years, has been the premier NetFlow analytics platform. We baseline traffic, have a detecting agent engine that can discover a DDoS attack, automatically figure that out, and then now we have a link with Cloudflare to activate the DDoS mitigation from Cloudflare. In addition to that, as a Kentik customer, there's a whole range of observability benefits that you get from the services we provide. We do performance monitoring to understand what's the performance impact of whether it's a mitigation or anything else going on, as well as BGP monitoring for hijacks, something I'm very interested in, as well as even be able to check up on that that DDoS mitigation. You'd like to see how that got propagated in PGP, something that Kentik would like to answer for you. Obviously, there's a lot more to this that the time and my voice will not allow. But please, if you have any questions, feel free to reach out. We'd love to talk to you about it.
Thanks, Doug. And yeah, if anyone's interested in a demo of the joint solution, you can feel free to reach out to us. And this is something that you can procure through Cloudflare as a combined solution. So this will, if you're looking to get off your legacy appliance-based DDoS, on-demand DDoS mitigation solutions, this is a great solution for our customers. And then last but not the least, I always like to talk about this example of what a typical scenario looks like, right? So all of us have used Wikipedia. So Wikimedia Foundation, one of the largest web properties out there, they got targeted with a massive DDoS attack, massive UDP floods, and significant increase in response times. User experience went down. They contacted us, and Cloudflare Magic Transit was able to stand up protection for them in a matter of hours. As soon as they put mitigation in place, the DDoS patterns changed, attackers went away, and they've been running with this ever since. So again, if you're the best time to do DDoS mitigation is now. The second best time to do is the best time to do DDoS mitigation is when you're under attack. The second best time is to do it now. So if you are under attack, definitely get in touch with us. We can help. If you're thinking about it more strategically, we can help you plan the right strategy as well. And with that, we will move on to questions. And also have Twitter handles here for Doug and David if anyone wants to reach out to us after this session. But let's go ahead. We've got quite a few questions here in our panel. Let's go ahead and take a few. So the first one is from Robert. As somebody in the telecom organization, it would be immensely helpful to perform packet captures. Do you foresee the ability to perform API PCAPs in the near future? So I have good news for you, Robert. So Magic Transit has something called Magic Firewall. And it gives you the ability, with the advanced license, you now have the ability to do packet captures at the edge of Cloudflare's network. So yes, you can do this right now. Get in touch with someone if you're already a customer, and we can get you on the advanced plan, and you can be able to do packet captures. The next question is, do you recommend blocking Russia and Tor as a country in Cloudflare settings? I'll give my opinion on this, and then I'll turn it over to David and Doug if you want to take a stab at this as well. Like we saw, what the data is showing us right now is the attacks are coming from botnets that are dispersed. So blocking a specific country is not going to help you stop the source of those attacks. And as a general philosophy, our approach is, well, Russians need more open access to parts of the internet. If we start shutting off parts of the internet from everyday Russians, and it's not a constructive exercise, and that's just sort of something that we've been advocating for. David, any additional takes from you on this?
No, it's exactly what I was going to say. I absolutely agree.
Doug, what's your view on this? Looks like we may have some audio challenges.
Yeah, these DDoS attacks, as you mentioned earlier in the talk, are coming from all over the world. So you're not going to protect yourself by blocking out a single country.
All right, another great question. What is the expected time to mitigation with the Kentik and Cloudflare Magic Transit solution? So as soon as Kentik detects DDoS attack and raises an alarm, the API call happens within a matter of seconds, and Magic Transit starts activating. So we started advertising BGP routes through the internet, and BGP routes take a little bit of time to converge around the internet for all corners of the internet to learn about it. It could be anywhere from a couple minutes to 10 minutes at the outset. So you'll see sort of a gradual ramp up in traffic shifting to Cloudflare Magic Transit. And in under 10 minutes, you should have all of it going through Magic Transit. Are we seeing any change in the motives for DDoS attacks? David, I'm going to turn this to you. You had some interesting commentary on this earlier.
It's hard to say. I think a lot of what we know about why a DDoS attack is occurring comes obviously from the attackers, and not all of them are fame-seeking. So I think that I think there's some set of attacks that are geopolitically motivated. There are going to be attacks that are as they say, done for the lulz, where it's kids that are otherwise bored, that are just taking advantage of unfortunately widely available tools. So I think that I wouldn't say that we're seeing any significant change right now in the motive for DDoS attacks. Although that it's a fluid situation, so we may see it change in the future.
Thanks, David. And that brings us to time. So I want to extend my deepest thanks to Doug Madory for joining us today. And despite the challenges, I really appreciate you being on and offering your insights. And I also want to thank David Belson for participating in this webinar with us. Thank you, David. Thank you, Doug. And if you want to reach out to any of us, our Twitter handles are on here. Feel free to ask us questions after the session. This recording will also be available and sent to you to be viewed on demand later on. And with that, thank you all for joining.